Logical reasoning is an element of all of our lives. We just use it rather sloppily. We usually omit premises essential to arguments in everyday speech. These are called latent assumptions, premises that are omitted on the assumption that they are already understood. For example, the statement, Flipper is a mammal because he is a dolphin, omits the premise that all dolphins are mammals. We can expand an incomplete logical statement by drawing out the premises that are assumed to be understood. To draw out the hidden logic in this argument, we must expand this into three parts. Premise 1, Flipper is a dolphin. Premise 2, all dolphins are mammals, therefore Flipper is a mammal. That's a valid logical argument that has no latent assumptions. Consider the latent assumptions in this example. This is a rabbit. He says, fellow council members, are you blind? Of course, Mr. Fox's conservation policies will favor carnivores, since he himself is a carnivore. And this is an example of when you can use a latent assumption as a rhetorical strategy. You just pass it off as something that's assumed that all carnivores support policies that favor carnivores. And so this is why you see this used so much in politics and rhetoric, which we'll get into later, is because there are certain things that you want your audience to assume, that you don't want to go into a complete syllogism like this, therefore this. Is that in politics you're speaking in a way that is not entirely logical. But the rhetorical statement has to be expanded to include the premise that all carnivores favor policies that will favor carnivores. So the argument, if there were a dissenting council member, would have to be attacked on latent premise 2. If it is false, if all carnivores don't support policies that favor carnivores, then the argument is unsound. One might imagine a very logically literate fox responding to this, saying, this is illogical nonsense. Most carnivores are decent, fair, hardworking folk who support balanced policies that favor the entire forest, carnivores and non-carnivores alike. Your latent premise is false. Your argument does not hold. Politicians and other salesmen will often use abbreviated dilemmas to present the two sides of an argument as though those were the only choices. For example, either we record everyone's phone calls or the terrorist grows stronger. This is a fallacy because it sneaks the latent premise that aggressive expansion of the security complex into recording everyone's phone calls is the only way to curb terrorism, whereas there could be other ways as well. It also sneaks the conclusion that recording everyone's phone calls will curb terrorism, which is not implicit in the logical form of the argument and cannot be deduced based on the premises stated. The sentence, either we record everyone's phone call or the terrorists grow stronger, reduces to the argument, recording everyone's phone calls will reduce terrorism. The terrorists are growing stronger. There's only one way to reduce terrorism. So the conclusion does not at all follow unless you actually state out all of those points. And that's 3 points, which are assumptions that you can, and premises that you can be attacked on. So this is an unsound logical argument because all 3 of its premises are questionable at best, and we require inductive reasoning, such as looking at security and intelligence and historical data, to decide if each of the premises is true. So in this one sentence, either we record everyone's phone calls or the terrorists grow stronger. There are at least 3 assumptions that are not justified to the listeners. You know what they say? How can you tell if a politician is lying? His lips are moving. Here's a funny meme. It's about dilemmas. He says, man, I'm pretty hungry, but I am also lazy. This is a dilemma. Then later he dies. False causes. A false cause attributes causation to a relationship between 2 variables that might not affect one another. A famous example: firearms are evil. They kill people. This is false because it confuses the fact that firearms are used to kill people with their essential nature. Obviously, if a firearm was forever stationary, it could not be described as evil. It is definitely illogical to say that firearms are evil for killing people. A logical argument for gun control, if there were one, would be that guns should be restricted because people kill people using guns and they are more effective as instruments of evil. So there are two kinds of false cause fallacies: cum hoc, ergo propter hoc, with this, therefore cause, and post hoc, ergo propter hoc, after the fact, therefore cause. A famous example of cum hoc fallacy is ice cream sales rise during the summer, which is true. Murder rates rise during the summer, also true, which means ice cream sales cause murder to increase, which is false. So there's a correlation between these two, but there's no causation. There's nothing in the logical form of the argument which would suggest that ice cream sales have anything to do with murder rates, except for the cum hoc, that these are just happening, these two trends are happening at the same time. However, although the events of rising ice cream sales and murder rates occur at the same time, again, there's no evidence that they are logically linked. An example of a post hoc fallacy is we sacrificed a bunch of humans. After that, it rained extra hard this year. Therefore, human sacrifice works to increase rainfall. Or simply, he became president and a bunch of bad things happened. His fault. So circular arguments are it uses an argument's conclusion as its support. So here's another comic strip. It says clean up this mess, but why? Because it needs to be cleaned. So that is answering the argument's conclusion and then restating that as a premise. So that makes the argument circular. It's time for you to go to bed. Why? Because it's your bedtime. So circular arguments are when a series of assumptions pretend to be an argument. Another example, if the earth were a sphere, they'd show us a picture, but then all pictures of spherical earth are fake because the earth is not a sphere. So it invalidates any logical reasoning to the prior and just declares them a priori to be fake. So circular arguments are dangerous because they can cause us to deny the evidence presented to us because we've already accepted the conclusion as a truth in itself. That means it's anti-logical because logic is all about getting the correct premises and finding the right conclusion. If you already have a wrong conclusion that you're unwilling to give up, you're not doing logic, you're doing fallacies. So this means that someone who affirms a circular argument is resistant to logical reasoning. So there's a higher level of logic actually at which circular logic becomes sufficiently powerful in general to be self-referential and self-proving, but this is not true at the level of semantic propositions. So there are a number of ways to test an argument to see whether it is logically sound. The most famous example is reductio ad absurdum. So assume that your opponent's argument is true and then use it to deduce a premise so absurd that your opponent can't accept it, you can't accept it, and it is demonstrably false. Therefore, your opponent will be forced to deny the logical implications of their own argument. This is the easiest way to win. So let's say there were original argument, it would be good for the country if everyone lived like a monk. And then your reductio might be, surely you would agree if everyone lived like a monk, depending on the charity of others, there would be no producers, and very soon the country would collapse. Conclusion, therefore, it would not be good for the country if everyone lived like a monk. They have to find a new argument because they don't have any objection to yours. Or if they bite the bullet on that and just say, yes, it would be better if everyone died and the whole country collapsed, then that actually gives strength to your argument because it shows that the other person is being very unreasonable and unwilling to update their own conclusions. So according to the principle of non-contradiction, which we'll discuss in the next lecture, something cannot be both good and bad for the country if everyone lived like a monk. So therefore, since we've reached the conclusion that it would not be good for the country if everyone lived like a monk, it might be good if most people did. The first argument is false, and we have to revise it. So identifying the most common logical crimes, such as Snuck premises, false dilemmas, false causes, and circular arguments, can allow us to pierce through the noise and deception to which we are most commonly exposed by politicians, news anchors, managers, self-help gurus, and others. Testing an argument through reductio ad absurdum can allow us to definitively prove a proposition incorrect on its own terms, using logic. This simple method can reveal the implications of your opponent's argument to be illogical or so downright absurd that they cannot accept the implication. Logic is about truth, and in a world full of lies and deception, it is a sine qua non of lifting your mind up high enough to see above the indoctrination and disinformation that can seal the better world our hearts know is possible. To love truth and hate lies is the basic condition of the moral man. And how can one do this without understanding how he is being lied to and how he can know the truth? Thank you. Take care. God bless. I'll see you in the next module.